Alright, what is up? Today we're going to be talking about the new game Cult of the Lamb. Start your own cult in a land of false prophets, venturing out into diverse and mysterious regions to build a loyal community of woodland followers and spread your word to become the one and true cult. This is an action, roguelike, cute, dungeon crawler, funny, dark humor kind of game. So this game released August 11th, and I've been playing it a little bit. I've been streaming it, and it's a pretty good game. I'm only about 4.5, 5 hours into it, and one of the main things that you notice when coming across this game is the art style. The art style of the game is really interesting. It kind of has this 3D Paper Mario kind of look to it, but like a different kind of art style, but kind of like formatted like some of the Paper Mario games. But the overall gameplay of the game is actually pretty interesting. So you play as a lamb, and your main goal is to like build followers, build a cult, build a base. You do a bunch of dungeon crawling. You can do things like fishing, grow in a garden, fight bosses, fight a bunch of different types of enemies. So it says this is a roguelike game, but really the only roguelike aspect to it are the dungeon crawls. So I did die once while I was playing this, and the only thing that happened was I got booted from the dungeon and I lost a little bit of the resources that I got out of the dungeon. So it's not like a traditional roguelike from, you know, like when you hear the word roguelike, you think about losing all your progress. This game is not like that at all. You basically just get kicked out of the dungeon and lose a little bit of resources, which is really not that big of a deal. And you lose a little bit of faith from your following. And what faith is, it's basically this bar that you have to keep up with. So you're given these daily tasks that you have to do, and from doing these tasks you gain like faith and devotion from your followers that are basically shown in a little progress bar on the top left side of your screen. And there's a couple of different other things you got to keep up as well. One of them is faith, one of them is food, and the other one is like sickness. So like your base can get dirty. Your little follower creatures can like poop and throw up all over the base area, and you gotta deal with that. So yeah, a massive part of this game, more than the dungeon crawling aspect of this game, is you're mainly gonna be like doing base management. So after dungeon crawling and stuff, which is generally pretty short, it doesn't take long to get through the dungeon crawls, you're definitely gonna be spending more time working on your base and, you know, like dealing with your followers and taking care of them and trying to keep them alive and, you know, faithful towards you. And I'm not gonna go too big into the story, just because like basically saying anything about the story is just gonna give away some spoilers that I don't want to give away. But basically there is a reason why you're trying to build this cult and why you're doing these dungeon crawls, which I will just say it's a pretty dark reason, which is another aspect of this game. So it comes across as this little cutesy little childlike kind of game, but really there's a really dark side to this game. I mean, obviously, like building a cult is kind of dark in itself, but it gets even darker. Once you get into the story of the game, it's pretty dark, pretty creepy, pretty evil, and I think that's a nice spin to add, especially with like such a cute little art style. I love when games do weird things like that, or even like music or anything. I love when something comes across as like really positive or nice, but really it just has like a dark kind of like other side to it that isn't obvious from the looks at it. So with the base management stuff, there's definitely a lot of stuff that you can do. There's a lot that I haven't even gotten into as far as like the base management and stuff. But basically, after you do these dungeon crawls and you do like your daily task, you unlock like certain points to put into certain areas. So you get these points called Divine Inspiration, and you spend these points on a menu that is basically different kind of build parts for your base. They have a lot of different things like sleeping bags, a temple, a garden, rest areas, you know, little huts, and a whole bunch of other stuff that you can add to your base that will progress your base further and allow you to build more and more complex things. I'm not too far into the game, so I don't have a lot of these things unlocked, and I haven't really looked into some of the things you get in later game, but you do get a lot of cool things. I mean, it's basically got like, you know, like a Stardew Valley type kind of flow to the game. Like you spend a lot of time gathering resources. You can send your followers to gather resources. You can assign your followers to do, you know, different types of jobs around the base and things like that. And one of the darker things you can do is, so your followers can die, so that they get old and they'll die. And one of the things you got to do to keep your base clean is you got to have these body pits. So you basically make a graveyard for any fallen followers that you have. And if you don't bury your followers, then, you know, your other followers can get sick and die as well. Which I think is pretty cool. It's a nice little dark touch to a game that I don't think that I've seen before. And as for the dungeon crawls, they're pretty straightforward. So you have 4 different dungeons that you can go into, and as far as I can tell, they seem to be procedurally generated. So every time you go into one of these dungeons, it's gonna basically be a different dungeon every time. So you have 4 doors, but really they procedurally generate into different dungeons, although they're technically the same place. Like the first place you go into is this place called Darkwood. I've probably run the dungeon probably like 7 times or so, and it was different every time I ran it. And as far as what you do in there, you got a bunch of different paths that you can take. You got these certain areas where you can unlock tarot cards, and the tarot cards can give you different abilities, different kinds of gains for your character. You often find different weapons in the beginning of a dungeon run, and you can also find different weapons, you know, throughout the run as well in different locations. So your primary way of fighting in the game is basically you have a normal attack, which is going to be like a melee weapon, and then you have a ranged attack. Depending on what kinds of abilities or like drops that you have found in the dungeon, the ranged attack can change quite a bit, and the melee stuff does change quite a bit. One of the biggest things that changes about the melee option is how much damage it does and what your attack speed is. So bigger, heavier weapons with more attack are generally going to be slower, but they also have other types of swords and things along those lines that are going to have a faster attack speed but not as much damage, which is cool. I'm glad that they add options like that. Any game that adds an option for different types of, you know, play styles as far as fighting styles and stuff like that is pretty cool. And the ranged attacks seem to be a little bit more varied than how the melee weapons are. The ranged attacks, I've seen at least like 4 or 5 different types of ranged attacks, and they vary a lot. And as far as the enemy types, I've seen a handful of different enemies. There's, you know, like a general like soldier type enemies that will do melee attacks with you. There's a couple of different monsters that'll go in the ground and fly over you and hop around the map and stuff. There's a few different bosses that I've already fought that haven't been the most challenging, but they do have interesting variety of like different attacks they'll do to you. I'm sure a bit later in the game they probably get a little bit more difficult. I went with the normal setting. I'm not really one for going hard on a game. I normally stick with the normal difficulty when I do a first playthrough a game. And I will say that so far, the difficulty isn't too crazy with this one. It's not too hard. I've only had 1 death so far, and it was literally at the end of a dungeon. One of the bosses at the end of a dungeon. So another big aspect to the game is you build a temple, which is basically kind of like you have this church where your followers will go in and worship you. And you do these sermons that'll give you another little point system they have. So basically you do a sermon and you draw energy, and your followers bolster a power, and you can put these points into something that's called the crown, and the crown will basically unlock a couple of different like rituals and stuff that you could do to your followers. Just to name a few, there's like a bonfire ritual, there's a sacrifice ritual, there's a ritual where you can ascend your followers into a higher level of existence. There's all kinds of weird shit in this game. And one of my favorite things about the game actually is the soundtrack. The soundtrack mixed with the way the trailer was mixed is definitely what got me to like actually look into the game and to buying it. The soundtrack is really good. I really dig the way the music is put together in this game. There's a lot of like chill out type sounds to it, and there's a lot of like upbeat kind of happy music. And there's definitely parts where the music can get a little more intense. So like I was saying, it has almost the Stardew Valley kind of aspect to it, so expect a little bit of grindiness to it. I recently just hit a spot in the game where it gets pretty damn grindy, where you spend basically a few in-game days of just going around, grinding out your base, taking care of your followers, making food, going fishing, working on your farm and upgrading things in your base. So there's definitely a grindy aspect to it. If you don't like grindy games, you might not like this game because it definitely has a few little grindy spots. But it doesn't seem to be as grindy as I've seen some games get. Some games get absolutely ridiculous with how much grind they add into it. And from what I've heard, this game isn't exactly the longest game in the world. So I don't think the grind is going to be too bad for late game either. But there is a little bit of grindiness to the game. But overall, I think it's a good game. It's got a unique art style. I wouldn't say that the gameplay itself is unique. The story is pretty good. I will say I really like the story to it. I'm not saying much about the story here, but I like the dark side of the story in this game. It definitely is one of the bigger pluses for me in this game. But that being said, I do recommend the game. I'm gonna give this game a solid 5 out of 10. It's unique. It plays good. I personally haven't run across any bugs. I'm sure some people have, but I haven't run across anything that's like detrimental as far as bug wise. The art style is cool. The music is cool, and I dig it. So yeah, we're gonna call it here for this one. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you're new around here, definitely subscribe. Also, follow me on Twitch. I do stream these games. I tend to stick with new releases, so if there's any new releases coming out, feel free to hop in and chat with me on Twitch while we check out some new games and stuff. Links will be in the description, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.